I think that building a content team, especially a multi-person content team, can feel very challenging because it is expensive, because the ROI is not one-to-one attributable. Content becomes a really vital part of any growth strategy because it's one of the key ways that you actually build a long-term relationship with your customer. It's going to take at least 6 months to even know if you're good at it. You have to push yourself to an uncomfortable degree about what it is you're going to offer that's going to be different.
Welcome to Turpentine Finance, a podcast where we talk with top founders and finance leaders about what it takes to architect success. Our guests speak candidly about big business inflections, market curveballs, and how they approach decision-making so that you have the tactics and mental models for when the pressure is on. I'm your host, Sasha Orloff, founder, CEO, and self-professed finance nerd. You ready? Let's dive in.
I'm thrilled today to have a special episode with Camille Ricketts. So let me just set the scene for a moment. A few years ago, I had this one conversation with Camille that altered the course of my company. So we'd been working on this MVP for quite a while, and we kept getting this feedback. How have I not heard of you before? And we just couldn't figure out how to build market credibility and kind of crack the growth engine. And of all things, she convinced me to do content for Puzzle's growth. And I'm so glad she did, because it got me over several hurdles and conventional ways I think of thinking about how to be convinced. Was this a good use of time and money? Chances are, if you're a founder or part of a scaling company, you might have had the same skepticism about content that I did. Also, I'm terrible at content. So how do I even get started? And how do I know if it's working? So I invited Camille on to essentially recreate this argument that convinced me that this was a benefit. And so hopefully the whole audience can demystify and put content on your growth roadmap. We'll also talk about if it's right for you and how to hire for it really well and how to think about ROI. So with that, let's meet Camille. Welcome to the show.
I'm super honored by all of those words, and I'm so glad that we met all those many months ago.
Me too. And just to set the tone, if anybody doesn't know who Camille is, a walk through your work history is the dream of probably almost any undergrad starting off. So managing PR for Tesla, reporter for the Wall Street Journal, started the first round review where you interviewed over 200 startup operators and got a taste of their wisdom. You became the first marketing hire at Notion, this tiny little company that I'm reading this off of right now. So I'm super excited to have you on a guest for many reasons. But first, I really want to dive into how and why companies should invest time, money, and resources into content as a growth strategy. So I know that a lot of founders and finance teams struggle with this decision because it can be expensive and it can take a while to build the momentum. And they might not think of themselves as a natural content or creative people. And how should they think about ROI? And also, most startups don't have a lot of time and money. So if you could start with the time maybe at Notion or anywhere else, and just pretend I'm a skeptical founder or a CFO like I was, how do you convince me that content is a good investment?
I mean, an amazing question. I'm so glad that you highlighted all of the considerations that come up whenever a company is sort of at the starting line of this particular journey. I know that it becomes, an argument of, do we have the resources in-house? Should we outsource it? Is that going to work? It is incredibly time consuming. I like to tell everybody who is at, this beginning stage of the journey that it's going to take at least 6 months to even know if you're good at it. There's a lot of reasons why you might sort of balk at the decision. However, I do think that content becomes a really vital part of any growth strategy because it's one of the key ways that you actually build a long-term relationship with your customer. It becomes the way, in a lot of senses, that you get to tell your story to them in a multifaceted sense. You get to outline the problem space for them. You get to show them what benefit it's been able to provide for others like them. You get to encounter and confront all of the many objections or issues they might, have with your product. It is a way to be a consultant, be a friend, really tell them who you are and what you stand for. Because most of the time, you're not going to get the opportunity to actually have a one-on-one conversation with them. And this is the way that they're going to get to know you.
So some of the things that I think if I were playing a skeptic, I could start to think about, how do I know if it's working? Can I even measure content? When I do marketing budget against, say, an ad platform, I can sort of see a click and see what the results are along the way. Can content be a measurable growth strategy? How should I think about it?
I think that it is a measurable strategy, but you gotta go easy on it. Which I know is kind of a weird way to express that. But honestly, and I feel this way about community as well, that if you put too many hard and fast ROI rules or expectations on content, you're gonna kill a lot of your most creative and probably breakout ideas stone dead. So you have to give yourself the opportunity to be a little bit out there, think about the differentiation, because that is really the game in content right now. And we can go into more detail on that. But when you do look at traffic and allow that to be the bellwether of how you're doing, you're really going to head yourself off at the pass a great deal of the time. So the metrics that I like to look at and what I made sort of my North Stars when I was at first round and then Notion is subscribers. How many people are opting into having that longer term relationship with you that you can then mobilize in a bunch of different directions later on? But basically they've added themselves to your marketable database, and they are somebody that you have the opportunity to speak to in all kinds of ways. And also looking at how many people you might have influenced to take an action that is important to you. So at Notion, one of the metrics that we really spent a lot of time looking at was what we called blog influenced conversions. And that was, month over month, how many people had looked at a piece of content, interacted with a piece of content, and then clicked that sign up button. And that was something that just gave us a signal. It wasn't something that we considered like the measurement that we were going to respond to in any drastic way, but it was a health check. And I think that is a good way to look at content, at least for the first year that you're doing it, is can we build in some health check indicators?
So let's take a moment and go right to like your first couple months at Notion. Paint the picture of like walking in as a first marketing hire. Are they like, we know content is the right thing and we need you to do it? Walk us through those first couple opportunities between community and content.
I'm so glad you asked that, because content honestly was not on the menu for the entire first year that I was at Notion. And I'm happy to talk about what was, but that was a very strange experience for someone who was coming off of, and this is my time at First Round, a content marketing arc, right? Like I was hired on the strength of what I did at First Round, and suddenly I landed in a spot where it was clearly not the top priority for us. And I had to get creative and, diversify my sense of what was needed from a marketing perspective. And then just to tell you an anecdote, but I like to share this, but the onboarding at Notion honestly was, which type of chair do you want? I even had 3 different types of chairs at the office. And I was like, it could be this chair, it could be this chair. And then I sat in it and I stared at my new computer and thought to myself, okay, what now? Which is, both the great gift, but also the challenge of being that early on.
This is probably pretty common for most companies and startups from either the early days or even as they start having the growth engine sort of working and they're thinking about how can content community help take it to the next level. So what are the things, is this a test and learn type of approach? How did you get started? What was the first thing you did?
Yeah. So the first thing I did was all about community. And I don't know how much we want to go in that direction, but it really is, I think, one of the core stories of Notion. It has many, but this is one of them. We had already seen evidence of people being excited and conversant about Notion across all of these social media channels. And it was clear that if we stoked that fire, that it was going to turn into something really special. And I'm so glad that we were right. And also that I hired the very best person early on. Very first hire on the marketing team was Ben Lang to be the steward of that community, and made such a big difference to have somebody day to day learning from the people who were so excited about Notion, and then being able to replicate that experience for, now millions more folks.
So I think a lot of times we talk to our customers, and so do we have those same insights into what customers are saying? How did you turn that into a flywheel at Notion, of turning that into something that either, is it focusing on acquisition? Is it focusing on retention? Where does it start?
Yeah, well, I can talk about this through both a community and a content lens, because we really did try to learn as much as we possibly could from the users themselves and what they were really gravitating toward, what they wanted from the product, the role that it was playing in their lives. Especially with the community, it was understanding what was going to make them participatory in this type of venue, what was going to get them to come back day after day before they had made those relationships and friendships that are now very durable over years. And it honestly was, I would say, like the number one thing early access to what was coming in the product. So the trust that we were able to give them to show them what was coming down the road, and then also be very serious and very clear in how we wanted their feedback and how it was going to be incorporated. We gave them access to people who were on the product and engineering teams. We went to the extra mile to put new features behind a feature flag, even though the engineering team was like, thank you for the errand. Because we wanted to give them time with a lot of the stuff that we were launching and tell us what they thought about it. And so much of what they have shared over the years has now found its way into the product and become really key to its success. So from the community side, listening to them was the only way that we were going to land on that particular strategy that was then going to enlist more and more excited people to then go be our ambassadors out in the world. And then on the content side, this is also kind of unique for me at the time because I was really involved with thought leadership at First Round. But listening to customers, what they most wanted was to understand how others like them, whether it was teams or individuals, were realizing a lot of value from Notion. And they also wanted to use the product well. They wanted to be capable with it. They wanted to be strong users. So the two types of content that we pioneered right there at the beginning was social proof, customer stories. And could we tell those customer stories beautifully? I think that video is honestly the highest leverage customer story format that you could possibly choose. Happy to share more about that. But it honestly gives you like audio, transcripts that you can turn into writing, et cetera, et cetera. It's gold. And then also just making a really robust help center that was not just about troubleshooting for folks, but introducing them to more and more of the functionality that was going to deepen their relationship with the product and make them feel really invested in what they were building for themselves.
I love that. Okay, so you talked about these two different strategies that helped work and get, okay, video testimonials can be a really powerful thing, and in video is there. Can you like walk us through how, like literally tactically, pretend, I'm the new hire on the team and we just got off this same podcast and you had this amazing thing. How do I turn that, or how do I turn that customer interview tactically into content? Does it just mean, do I write a blog post and do I put it on a blog post? What is it that I tactically do?
Yeah. So let's say you have this video, right? And ideally you have several folks who have now provided, voiced testimonials about what they do with the product, what it means to them. You want to definitely capture the value that this is driving for them and any pains that it's killing for them. This is sort of going back to the jobs to be done structure that underpins a lot of marketing. But you always want to think about your end users' pains and gains, right? So like what is causing them all of the frustration and friction in their jobs, their lives, et cetera, and can you help solve that for them? And then gains, what gets them promoted? What makes them feel good? What makes them feel like their place in work? And I would even say like broader in their lives is where they're supposed to be. A lot of people ask about how you can make B2B storytelling really pop in that way. And with every B2B product, it's something that is probably saving a human being time that they could then spend with their kids at home. And that's something that I really like to think about when I'm developing content or helping people with their strategies, is that you have the opportunity to tell those bigger stories that have an emotional underpinning. And if you get there, the marketing is successful. So I think that that's where we were excited to play at Notion, was making all of those things clear for people.
Is there a way to do testimonials or quotes the wrong way? Is there anything that separates one quote from another quote in your mind that stands out to customers?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of quotes don't sound the way that human beings actually talk. And I think that that's the number one thing that is kind of an alarm bell that goes off for me when I am reading through a website, right? And I see these disembodied quotes, particularly if you don't see the person's face. This is actually scientifically proven. I wish I could cite my source, but I remember coming across it in several ways that if you have a human being pictured, a testimonial actually is more effective. So always think about how you can have one human being staring at another human being when you're providing a testimonial. Always a good rule of thumb. And then make sure that it actually feels conversational, like it's something that somebody might have said in the duration of a conversation where they're recommending the product to you. Like, let's say that you're having a conversation with a friend where you're outlining your problem at work, and then that friend actually suggests a product. Like, that happens all the time to us. But most testimonials don't sound that way. And I think that they hit harder, they feel more authentic when they do. And then I would say you have to get really good at asking questions, like interviewing skills. It's something that I think every marketer, certainly every product marketer, should really focus on developing, is being able to ask the same question several different ways in order to get that dimensionality of the person's response. What is it that is happening with the experience of your product that has changed the way that they work beyond something that they might quantify in like hours saved or, revenue realized, etc. I hope that that's helpful.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the things that as you evolve, it feels like there's the testimonial as this quote, and we can drive this really sort of emotional thing. Some other businesses, especially B2B or enterprise, have this selling point about saving time or money. And you talked a little bit before about this concept of doing a case study and best practices in sort of case study as a content. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, case studies, obviously you want to get to some quantifiable call outs, right? You do want to have those numbers that you can ideally break out of the core text of whatever it is that you're publishing out there. And you asked about format earlier for these. At Notion, we would have, if we did have a video with the company, and we did several videos with the likes of Figma and Loom and Lattice, etc., we would have the video there at the top so that we could have humans staring at other humans, very important. And then we would try to break out the numbers that quantified the ROI. But then the text under that was really about the emotional experience of using the product and how it imbued the team that, was using Notion with the feeling of more creativity. This idea that it was, maybe not accelerating work, but it was making work more delightful, more engaging for people. And that in itself is an end that every manager should be aiming for. And that really goes, and this is the last thing I'll say on this topic, with knowing who you want to make the champion or the hero of the story, having a protagonist for your case studies. Maybe it's several people for a company if you've spoken to, more than one, but you do want that person to come alive as the hero, the person who brought in a product, a tool that has now changed everything for the people around them for the better. And they were responsible for it. It's a, feather in their cap that they were able to do that. You want to make them aspirational for the people who are interacting with the case study.
Hey, we'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
The less your business spends, the more margin you keep. But today, everything costs more. So smart businesses are graduating to Netsuite by Oracle. Netsuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one proven platform, helping you reduce IT costs, maintenance costs, and manual errors. Over 37,000 companies have already made the move to Netsuite. Backed by popular demand, Netsuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/102. That's netsuite.com/102. Real talk. Most talent leaders haven't yet cracked how to leverage AI for meaningful impact on their hiring processes and business goals. But the leaders who are effectively using AI to transform their recruiting team's efficiency and quality use Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. That means your people can focus on creating a human connection with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes mean perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Join forward-thinking talent leaders at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts or get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI enabled in minutes.
All right, so we have a couple sort of pieces. We're talking to customers, we're getting testimonials, we're doing case studies. How do you know if it's working? Like, what does good feel like?
Good feels like other people talking about it, honestly, which I know feels qualitative and anecdotal. And I'm sure that there are content marketers out there that would say, come on, Camille, you should look at scroll depth and time on page and all of that. And I agree. You should have all of that on hand. But especially in my experience at First Round, it was really about sparking zeitgeisty conversations among the right people. It wasn't about the volume play of, oh, are we having more readers, more people necessarily being driven by this? It was about having the right folks be excited about the content that we were publishing, excited enough to share with other folks like them. And so one thing, and I'll just share this because it's tactical, but Sean, who was my writing partner at First Round, and I, on Slack, whenever somebody on Twitter who with over 10,000 followers tweeted a First Round URL, we got a Slack notification. So we were able to see immediately who they were, what they said, and then DM them and say, we're so excited that you're reading the First Round review. If there's anything we can ever do for you, or if there's more content that you would like to see, we would love to know. And that's how we ended up, in a sense, kind of crafting influencers or envoys out there in the world without calling it an influencer program.
I think we think about that right as a flywheel, where if you get the right set of content, it sort of amplifies without you needing to continue to do it. If we want to start that flywheel, we have a couple sort of strategies. How do you get to a point where you should be doing more of it? Like let's say you start here and then maybe you hire somebody, maybe it's a contractor just to start because it's sort of an easy sort of way to start testing and learning. And then it starts working. How do you know how many more resources? Like, should you hire more people? How do you start thinking about it, or how do you justify that to either your founder or your CEO or your CFO?
Yeah, I think that building a content team, especially a multi-person content team, can feel very challenging, especially because it is expensive, because the ROI is not one-to-one attributable. I would say that it's actually a benefit to a lot of content programs to not have that many people involved, because then you're able to hit a very specific tone that becomes consistent, and that's just strength and amplification for your brand. So if you have somebody who you've brought on board full-time, who really gets the tone of voice and what it is that the brand stands for and what you're trying to get people to perceive about you, especially somebody who likes the execution of writing, that's as good as gold. I think that there's a lot of content marketers, and this is not a value judgment at all. One is not better than the other, but lots of content professionals love the strategy piece, don't love the execution piece. And so if you find an editorial person who just really loves the act of creation, Sean from First Round is one of the probably maybe the best person in this category. That is the type of persona you're looking for. And it also allows you to not have to then build a big team in order to get to where you want to go. I know that was sort of like a sideline on your question a little bit.
Not all. You are the expert. I'm just trying to prompt you with the questions that make this interesting to the audience. All right. Before we move, please,
I was going to
keep
say,
going.
In terms of justifying the hire to a CEO, I would point at examples of readers out there in the world who have now shared with others what it is that you're doing, or have written in to talk to you about the content that you've put out, because I think that CEOs and founders in particular really respond favorably to knowing that this is influencing, that knowing that whatever you are creating is having that desired impact. So even though it feels really anecdotal and again, really qualitative, I think that becomes like the biggest asset that you can have in that argument.
Before we go to First Round, because I think it will be hard, even if you believe in it, which was hard for me until we started the engine. And now it's about I think up to 40% of our growth of the entire time over for the last year.
Oh, that's so great to hear.
Yeah, it's amazing. But I think there's still always a piece of me that's a little skeptical and wants to like still measure in terms of acquisitions or sort of web traffic. Are there any tips or tricks that can just help make that a little bit better? I think you told me at one point that even just on the case studies or on the blog post, remember to have a call to action on the bottom or reinforce the points.
Yeah. That's the only way that you're going to get to your blog or let's say your publication influence conversions. You have to put the content in proximity of that action that you want people to take. The content itself doesn't have to drive toward it. It can just glance at it or be adjacent to, but you do want that floating out there. And sorry, this is very tactical now.
Yeah, this is what I want.
You don't want to give that person the ability to very quickly scroll past that call to action in order to, imbibe your content. You basically want it to follow them as they're reading, because people don't decide that you're awesome enough to take a chance on at the beginning of something. And so I find it tough when they have, their call to action button sort of in the nav that's not sticky or something along those lines. And then you scroll and then it goes away. People decide honestly in the middle of things that they are reading that they want to have a bigger relationship with you. This is something that maybe this is a nice segue to first round that we really discovered there. And so we would even have the social media buttons, the share buttons follow you as you read, because we knew that people would get, 5 paragraphs deep and then be like, this is tweet worthy. I am going to tweet this.
That's fascinating. All right. And last question on this topic before we do, should we head over to first round review? Because that's such an incredible publication. I mean, taking on TechCrunch to become one of the most sort of revered and trusted sources of content for startup founders. So interesting. But first, who do you think is doing content and community really well today?
I mean, Figma, I really do have such a crush on them just from a marketing perspective. I love what the team over there has done with both content and community. And what they know and have done so well is that they understand the value of the visual content always being a complement to their written content. They know who their audience is so precisely that they're able to go deep and therefore differentiate their content for people who are area experts. And then they know their channels. They know their channels really well and who wants to see what on which channel. And they've just gone really long with it. I really respect what they've done.
Nice. Anybody else?
I mean, Stripe does a great job, but I think that their big asset there is Patrick. I mean, Patrick is so cerebral and amazing and a terrific writer as well, and has really, I think, elevated the users of Stripe because they themselves see themselves reflected in Patrick as people who are extremely sharp and want to be using the same tools that somebody like that is using. Yes, and I think that the content does a great job of allowing him to convey that to a larger audience, a one-to-many.
All right. So now let's go to the founding story of, I would argue, one of the most successful and trusted industry publications, First Round Review, which has helped me through so many amazing things. How did you conceive of this? Like, what did you think was missing in the market at the time that this started?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would be remiss if I didn't call out that Jessie Craig Schickman has been the person running First Round Review now for 6+ years, longer than I did it myself. And she's been doing such a beautiful job. So I do want to plug her right off the bat here because she has kept it going in a way that I'm inspired by every single time I see it. So looking back now, let's go all the way back to 2013, which I mean is now over 10 years ago, which makes me feel a certain way. And, First Round really knew that it wanted to do content. I think at the time, we really benefited from market timing here. Andreessen was the only game in town. It was really the partners holding forth on what they saw as industry trends out there in the market. But there wasn't a publication giving voice to operators actually on the startup journey at the time. And that was going to be the primary differentiator against what we perceived to be like the only other VC that was really investing in content to that extent. And it was a formula that we landed on over time. It honestly started with me attending talks of really exceptional operators, sharing what it was that they were doing well tactically. And then I would write summations of those talks and then realizing how deep people really wanted that tactical knowledge to go, it became apparent probably within 3 months that if we did interviews instead of just relying on what people cared to share in order to go after things and then push people to that level of detail pretty aggressively, honestly. Like, I'm happy to go into the interview process there, but there was a lot of like, no, we really want to know exactly how you did it. The example that I like to give is that we would ask people, oh, how did you hire this incredible team of people? And they would say, well, we only hire A players. And you're like, okay, that's the advice that a lot of people give, and then it stops there. So how can we then ask, okay, well, what is the actual interview format? Do you go to coffee with them first? What questions do you ask at that coffee? What is the email that you send to people like after the coffee? We really wanted to go into that degree of like granular tactical detail. And I think that that's what ended up being the winner there, was people feeling like it almost was reference or manual material for some of these very core and very challenging aspects of building a startup company.
Hey, we'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
The tech world turns to the Brave browser for its unbeatable privacy protections. But did you know that Brave also has a private ad platform? Brave Ads offers first-party targeting, and it's been cookieless since day one, so you can relax while third-party tracking cookies disappear from the web. Today, millions of people turn to ad blockers to avoid being tracked and pestered online. But Brave's new ad model aligns incentives for users and advertisers. Users earn rewards for viewing ads, which they can save, spend, or pass along to their favorite creators. And advertisers score points for respecting user privacy, generating ROI without invasive tracking. So whether it's high-impact announcements on the new tab page or keyword-targeted ads in Brave Search offers diverse, private, future-proof ad formats for all your business goals. Join the future of advertising at brave.com/ads. Mention Turpentine to get 25% off your first campaign.
Omneky uses generative AI to enable you to launch hundreds of thousands of ad iterations that actually work, customized across all platforms with a click of a button. I believe in Omneky so much that I invested in it, and I recommend you use it too. Use CogRev to get a 10% discount.
And so if we take that, I think that's really good. So you mentioned that you iterated on a couple different formats till you found the format that worked. And I think a lot of us as startup founders or things are thinking about, how do I get started? How do I get started? And so I think one of it is, do you remember some of the early either formats or interviews? And how did you get to a place where you landed on the right format? Just how do you get over that initial fear of getting started?
You have to give yourself a lot of grace. Honestly, you have to know that there's going to be not just a first pancake, but there's going to be 10 pancakes, maybe more than that. And that's okay. It's not like the only bite that you're going to get at this apple. I do think that it becomes really important to post-mortem every single experience that you have. So as you are starting out, being like, okay, well, I think that this is something that is underrepresented as a point of view in the market. This is something that our customers really want and need. We've validated that through some customer conversations, which I should have added. We did have a bunch of founder conversations where we asked them what they were missing. And all of them, they didn't come right out and say like, I wish that there was a blog that featured all of these incredible operators sharing their...
I would like an interview format with these people.
Exactly. What they did say, and actually like verbatim, several people said, I'd love to have coffee with Stuart Butterfield. And I mean, Stuart's a wonderful guy.
Who wouldn't?
Don't understand, that is not surprising. I completely understand it. But what we wanted to do then was create a content format that would replicate that type of coffee conversation and make that type of access available to more founders who would never be able to maybe have that opportunity. So it was really sort of like reading some tea leaves from those founder conversations or audience conversations, starting out with a hypothesis, which is why I started attending those talks, and then iterating from there, both on format of the content, but also process to get to that format. And I can give some examples of that if that would be useful.
I definitely want to hear that. I think before we get to that, let's think about two things. One, just to help people get over the fear of failure, because it's content, the stakes are kind of low. What was something you tried in the early days that just didn't work?
I mean, shorter form stuff, honestly, which was sort of an odd experience because in my mind, and I had come from journalism, you want to be pithy, be brief and then leave. But that was not necessarily what people wanted. They really wanted the step-by-step nitty-gritty. And not only that, but they wanted to hear stories. Like, I think that people underestimate the value of lore, particularly when you're writing for a professional audience, especially in the startup atmosphere. People love lore, right? They love knowing about the behind the scenes at some of the household names that have come to the forefront. And so being able to kind of like whisper to them about stuff that happened in back rooms somewhere like Dropbox or Airbnb, that was kind of like the New Yorker-y hook that we wove through the HBR sort of tactical guidance.
And is there anything that you remember that took off more than you anticipated?
Well, okay. Well, speaking of failure, and then I'll get to that, but I really, honest to goodness, and you could ask my former manager at First Round, Brett Burson, who really helped pioneer this format with me. I thought I was going to be fired like every single day for the first 6 months that I worked at First Round. I was like, people are not reading this. I don't know what's going on. What? Like, this is bad news bears. And then the first piece that took off in any real way was with Karen Maroney, who was at the time running communications for Facebook, which of course is like one of the most challenging jobs known to the human species. And she had a framework that she offered for helping startups shape stories that reporters would actually want to cover. And that ended up launching and getting 13,000 not just views in the first day, but shares, like actual people clicking to share on Twitter or LinkedIn. And from that moment on, a lot of the back catalog, including my piece with Stuart Butterfield that was pretty early, ended up being revisited. But what was interesting about the Karen Maroney piece is that we were under the impression that a lot of the better, more popular content would be technical, would be for engineering leaders, would be for product leaders. But this was really on the go-to-market side and more of like the art of the go-to-market side. And that really opened up a whole other field of what was possible.
I think this is like an interesting transition. So we're in a place where you've tested and learned, you've iterated, and you found this format that really worked for First Round and what was really kind of getting into the needs of your users. Now, fast forward a decade later, and there's been sort of a revolution in large language models and content generation. I want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on the implication of AI in content creation. What impacts do you think it's having today, and what do you think that looks like in a couple more years?
Yeah, I mean, I get this question a lot. It's something that I love to kick around with Nate Martins, who was the head of content at Notion for the last 5 years. And he and I, are like, okay, well, where does AI get applied? Is it just for SEO, not for thought leadership? Is it going to be capable of thought leadership? Does it actually accelerate content professionals? Is it a tool for them to use, or is it an eventual replacement? Do readers know the difference? Is there a sniff test out there, right, for what is AI generated and it automatically becomes less engaging? I am of the mind that AI is not there yet for it to actually credibly replace pretty much anything that I see happening out there in content, perhaps with the exclusion of SEO driven motivated content. But I'm also have the opinion that SEO is going to change here drastically and not necessarily be as successful of a leather soon. So there's that. And I think that content is going to be pushed up and up and up in terms of the level of thoughtfulness and the level of humanity that it needs to embody in order to actually influence people. So I think we're going to see a lot more, hopefully better content, because it's going to just be like pushed up by all of this AI generated content.
Does that mean, do you think sort of it's going to redefine what trust means in terms of sort of content generation, if it's so easy to generate, or copy maybe? What do you think about sort of copycats? Because maybe a concern that a lot of us have is, I spend time, I understand my customer, I do all this work, I put something out there. It's just like very easy for somebody else to just say, oh, I'll do that too. Like that's a good one, I'll borrow that. So what do you think about either copycats, or how do you stay ahead of the curve?
I do think it comes back to that question of differentiation and not allowing yourself to slip into having that conversation once, but you have to now have it again and again and again and again. Like, how are we going to tell a different story, provide different data, give people different access, teach them how to do something new just repeatedly, as opposed to we're just going to cover the same stuff that's always been covered. And I'm always surprised by the number of content programs that add to just the general noise of questions that have already been answered, 25 times. Like there's so many articles. They're like, well, I'm building a database product and I am going to write an article about how to choose database products. You're like, yeah, that's been done so many times. You have to push yourself to an uncomfortable degree about what it is you're going to offer that's going to be different.
All right. Well, I'm going to take advantage because we have a captive audience here with you. What do I do to differentiate in this podcast to help people? How do I think about that?
Yeah. Well, I think that you can do it in your guest selection, obviously. Like, what is it that people really want to, who is it that people really want to hear from? Not just what is it that people really want to hear? Like, I think Lenny's done such an excellent job of saying, I'm going to elevate product leaders, to the extent that I know that he's even reluctant to have CEOs on. He's like, no, this is not a podcast about CEOs. This is a podcast about product leaders. And I think that level of focus and specificity, I think, is a real boon for podcasts like this. And then also getting people to say things that they haven't said anywhere else, right? Like asking them bizarre questions that they don't expect, asking people who are in the habit of talking about the same things all the time and maybe have gone on several podcasts to share the same stories, and getting them to talk about something completely different that's going on in their work or lives.
So if we think about sort of your superpower, I think your superpower when it's about is storytelling and being able to communicate effectively how something is important. That came to a place where that started throughout your career. So maybe you could share a couple anecdotes of like, what are some of the key lessons you learned at the Wall Street Journal, at Tesla, at First Round that guided your career and got you to this point where you'd be able to deliver this value to so many companies?
That's very kind of you to frame it as a superpower. I'm not going to be quite that stilted, I guess, or vaunted in my. I think that I'm a really good interviewer. I think that, honestly, that stems from being a good listener, which maybe stems from being a very shy only child. I don't know. But I think that if you become a good asker of questions as a content professional, that ends up really paying the most dividends, because then you get people to almost do your job for you. Like, one of the things that I really loved about First Round Review, because I got to make up all the rules, is that I got to include like massive quotes. Like, it wasn't just like a sentence here, a sentence there. It was like, I am verbatim saying what this person said to me that I thought was so special, and trying to elevate those other people's voices and allowing that type of just human mode of expression and the musicality that individuals have that's so specific to themselves to like come through in whatever it is that you're writing. I think that is underestimated sometimes. So that's what I'll say is the through line that followed me, I think, from, work at the Stanford Daily all the way through today.
So when you're at the Stanford Daily, at First Round, at Wall Street Journal, you're telling other people's stories. At Tesla, you're working in PR. You're helping enable somebody else to tell stories. Any interesting insights in that sort of seat at the table?
Yes. If there's a specific anecdote, I would love to hear it that you're signaling. But my role at Tesla was, in fact, partially to sit next to Elon during his conversations with reporters and make sure that he had all the facts and figures at his fingertips, and that the narratives that we had as goals sort of came through in those conversations. And that required a lot of preparation, as one might imagine. Elon is a very exacting human being. This was many years ago, but had high standards for everybody around him. And it really molded me into somebody who constantly had the latest, just like, at a moment's notice. How many cars have we sold? Have the exact figure ready. No time to be like, oh, let me get that for you. It really turned me into somebody who was capable of doing that.
I think we probably feel to some degree a bit of that as founders and as CFOs sitting in boardrooms, not necessarily knowing what the boardroom is going to ask you and having be prepared. Any tips or tricks on how to prepare? Like, how do you think about every possible question that Elon is going to potentially say at any given time in any moment? How do you do that? There's can't be enough time in the day.
It's a really good question. I'm a big fan of the comms doc. And this is a document that can be utilized in many different ways in your life. Doesn't have to be in preparation for media interviews. Could be for, the meeting that you have with your boss in the next hour, where you go through the exercise of writing down the questions that you are likely to get and the questions that you wish you won't get. Like, you truly want to do both of those. And then bullet out what it is that you're going to say and like try to be as anticipatory as you possibly can. Like, what is it that is likely to come up in this conversation that Elon's about to have with car and driver? Obviously, they're going to want the brass tacks of what's going on with Model S. But also, what do we not want them to ask? And if they in fact ask it, how can I help him navigate that type of question?
Any time that you weren't prepared?
What an interesting question. I'm not prepared to answer that.
All right, we can go on. You've given so much back. I'm sure you talk to founders all the time. And so what's the number one thing they ask you?
I would say the number one thing is about the basic narrative arc or positioning of their companies, honestly, because that is the stem cell. That's the root case that any content strategy would grow out of, any community approach that you want to take would grow out of. But it honestly comes down to what is the verbiage that is on their homepage to a large extent, and does that to the best possible extent tell a story that is going to motivate their ideal customer to take the action that they want? Have they, in fact, hit upon the value propositions and the problem statements and the call to action that is going to effectively get their person that they're focused on over the line? So that is what I spend the bulk of my time talking about. And then speak to a lot of them about how that wends its way into all these other marketing channels.
I guess building on that, what's the piece of advice that you also give out the most that they should listen to, but they just don't?
I think that people really drastically underestimate, and I've been guilty of this many times, how important continual, regular customer conversations are. That you can't just say like, I'm going to do a jobs to be done exercise. I'm going to talk to these 25 people. They're going to tell me exactly what it is that I need to be doing and saying and selling. And then leave it at that. But you really do need to ideally set one up for yourself at least once a week and make sure that you are remaining in touch with what it is that they want to be hearing from you, what is actually needed by them. Are you telling the right story?
Well, thank you so much. I would want to go on for at least another couple more hours, but at some point we have to start. How can people find you and anything else that you want to share with the audience?
You can find me, I guess, on X now at Camille Ricketts.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Camille.
Thank you. This was such a joy. Thank you so much, Sasha.
Thanks for tuning in to Turpentine Finance. Share it with your executive team, direct reports, friends, and family. And if you want to support the show, the best ways are to leave a review wherever you're listening and subscribe. Turpentine Finance is part of Turpentine, the podcast network behind Moment of Zen, Turpentine VC, Age of Miracles, and more. Shows for experts by experts in tech.